Welcome to Zooming In on Hate, where we offer some clarity on the world of online hate, one conversation at a time. From policies and strategies to the latest trends and themes, we'll zoom in on what really matters in making the online space safer and transparent for everyone. And yeah, we know we've been quiet for a while, but trust us, it has been for the right reasons. Over the break, we've been reworking the podcast to bring you more research, deeper insights, and the latest news about online hate and how it's being tackled across the globe. So, a lot of exciting new things, but the same two hosts you hopefully know and love. And speaking of which, we were prepping this episode and it hit us. We never properly introduced ourselves the last season. So, why don't we fix that right now? Lydia, hi, welcome back. Why don't you start us off by sharing with our audience what's got you so interested in challenging this unique topic?
Hi, Geordie, and it's great. Yeah, really good to be back doing Zooming In on Hate. Yeah, so I'm Lydia El-Khoury, as I've introduced myself in previous podcasts, and I work at TextGain, which is a company that uses AI for good. And I'm also involved in the European Observatory of Online Hate, and Zooming In on Hate is part of that project. So I really, as long as I've been working in this kind of sector of civil society for over 2 decades now, I've always worked on freedom of expression. And I think, as you experienced too, Geordie, the nature of freedom of expression changed quite dramatically with the increase in social media. The topic became a lot more complicated with social media, and I think it's now more relevant and important to balance the freedom of expression argument slash right with the right for other people to live without being discriminated or abused or be threatened online. So I think that tension between freedom of expression and freedom to live without abuse and discrimination is at the center of a lot of conversations around media regulation, social media regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one that nobody has the answers, but we'll be coming at it from different angles over the next few episodes. So, Geordie, about you, tell us about how you got here, why you got here, and why you're doing this podcast.
Thanks, Lydia. Yeah, no, I'll try to keep it brief. But, for me, it really comes down to, I don't know, my own belief that stories or communication can change people's lives. With hate speech, polarization, disinformation, of course, it can affect people's lives in a very negative way. But, communication can also be used for good. And you mentioned it already. These are interesting times because with the rise of the internet, with social media, loads of things have changed. To introduce myself properly, my name is Jordi Nijnijs. I'm a storyteller, campaigner, trainer based in the Netherlands. I'm the director of Dare to Be Grey, and that's an organization that's working to counter polarization, disinformation, hate speech, basically by researching and analyzing these topics, especially from that online perspective. So how does the online world have an impact on society? Plus, we build interventions where we deem them needed. And that's basically by calling people on to recognize the gray middle ground in topics that are often perceived as black and white. And with Dare to Be Grey, we are obviously involved with the European Observatory of Online Hate. But next to that, I do a range of things, including working closely with the International Network Against Cyber Hate, or being the lead trainer for a variety of training programs for a range of organizations, including the Radio Netherlands Training Center, where I work with journalists to tackle disinformation. And again, that sounds like a lot, but I really believe that media can also be used as a tool for good. That's something that I want to focus on. And, I love doing this podcast as well, because with Zooming In on Hate, we get to meet these amazing people who are trying to change that, trying to change that landscape by using media. And, I'm also really excited for this new season. I'm looking forward to all the conversations we're going to have about these topics. So, Lydia, tell me, what are you looking forward to in this new season?
So, as you know, Geordie, I'm I'm a big fan of the Digital Services Act. I think it's the right time, it's the right place, and I think we're all looking forward to it coming into full effect, so that the online space can be safer, and more nuanced, more positive space to be on. So, as part of the European Observatory Online Hate, we've been developing tech and skills within civil society and law enforcement to help monitor hate speech and disinformation. So we've got a fresh tranche of EU funding to help us develop the AI tools further, and we have fantastic partners. Dare to be Grey leading the project, TechScain, where I work, Jugendstiftung in Germany, the Violence Prevention Network also in Germany, as well as a range of law enforcement agencies across Europe who are keen to embrace AI and technology to help with the overwhelming amount of illegal hate speech that is potentially undermining our democracies and causing confusion amongst communities, destabilization. And we want to bring it back to a point where social media is regulated, it's safe, and it's a less scary place to be.
Absolutely. And, I think we've got some exciting work ahead of us because, it's also training and bringing together civil society and law enforcement. And we've seen the impact quite clearly of maybe an under-regulated social media over the past couple months, right? We had riots in Ireland, the UK, also here where I'm based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And I know you're a bit more into the DSA than I am, maybe. But it's an interesting time to look at legislation and trying to see if that might be part of the solution in a very profound way. So speaking of the Digital Services Act, you've been really on top of it. How is it shaping this fight against online toxicity?
So I have to give a huge disclaimer here. I am not a lawyer and I'm not a policymaker, so my interest is really from a kind of a practitioner's perspective. But I think it's the EU is leading the world on this topic, and I think the world is watching to see if the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act will provide that safety online that I think we all want. I don't think there's anybody who craves the destabilization that manifested itself, as you said rightly, in Ireland, in the Netherlands, in the UK. Where it was used to amplify tension, stoke division, and escalated into violence. I mean, I think the thing we find ourselves in, or the position we find ourselves in, which is different to say 5 years ago, is that there is clear link between what's said online and what happens on our streets, and drawing parallels between those two worlds, and blurring out a division between online and offline because they are one, really, is more and more commonplace. It's not something we as stakeholders in the monitoring online hate world have to justify anymore. We can say we know that words matter, don't they? What you say online can have an impact to people's real lives, to impact human beings, and can impact any of us. So I think it's really crucial that we have a framework for regulation so that you can't say just whatever you want, whenever you want, to whoever you want with impunity. So the Digital Service Act, right? So it's been came into force in February, as we know, 2024. Now, digital service coordinators are being established across the EU. I think almost all are in place, and they're in the process of recruiting trusted flaggers. And trusted flaggers is another. It's a really interesting new stakeholder group that have come out of the Digital Services Act. So they will be organisations who are tasked with making sure that illegal hate speech has been removed as promised on social media platforms. So it's exciting times. Every day there are new trusted flaggers who've been appointed by the digital service coordinators in each of the countries. But I won't get into too much detail about that because we're going to have a chat with Daniel Heller from CEJI in Belgium later on in the show, and he's produced a really interesting policy brief on the Digital Services Act. So we let him explain that in greater detail later on.
Oh yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that because policy, especially when it's policy from Brussels, I don't know, it's always written down in a specific way that's not, let me say, easy to grasp. And especially if you have like other things going on, working in civil society, it's really hard to get into the nitty gritty of legislation and the Digital Service Act. So I'm very very pleased that Daniel will be joining us to explain it, hopefully in words we can all understand, because it's an important piece of legislation, right?
It is, and I think it's going to impact all our lives. I mean, and I actually think the vast majority of tech platforms want this framework.
Yeah, and I've been talking to many journalists, but also activists from all over the world, and even abroad. People are really focusing and looking at the European Union right now for the impact of the DSA. Often there's this spillover effect. When Europe regulates something, it kind of affects different markets as well. Like the GDPR, privacy has become so fundamental because of the GDPR. And now we see that other markets and other areas all around the globe have better privacy protection because these platforms just enforce it for the entire platform. So it's pretty interesting to see how the European Union is the first multinational organization that tries to pull this off. And I share your optimism. I think it's long overdue, but it's good that it's finally here, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, at the core of the DSA, it's something that we all care about, which is online safety. We all spend too much time online as it is. So we need to know there are rules, and that as the DSA kicks in, and it is early days, but think progress is definitely being made. I would say honestly, on a week by week, month by month basis. The latest news is transparency reports by social media platforms have been standardized now. That's something that's been spoken about for a few years now, but thanks to the DSA, that's come in. But it's also really interesting in that there's an enhanced role for civil society organizations under the DSA. They now have an opportunity to become trusted flaggers, as I mentioned, which gives them their monitoring work a kind of a more important, a priority step in keeping an eye on what's happening on social media, because no one organization knows everything that's happening on every social media platform. It's just not possible.
Yeah, and well, speaking of civil society, I know that you did like an assessment all over Europe. Basically, you spoke to 30 something
Yeah,
civil
30.
society
That's right.
organizations all
That's
across
right.
Europe. Do you mind sharing some highlights, some key takeaways from you?
It,
What are
it
people saying about the DSA and online landscape?
So it was a really interesting experience. So I got the opportunity to speak to around 35 civil society or EU based civil society organizations about their experience of the Digital Services Act. So bear in mind it came into effect February 2024, and I spoke to them in the summer of 2024. So I asked them a variety of questions in and around their monitoring habits or their monitoring processes. The majority of the civil society organizations were monitoring hate speech for their own advocacy work. Some of them were using it for research. I think 2/3 of the organizations that I spoke to were already recognized community partners with the social media platforms. So they were already in direct communication with most of the social media platforms. And actually, 40% of those that I spoke to were already in touch with their digital service coordinator in their countries, which was great
That's a good
news.
sign. Yeah.
It's a really good sign. When I asked them about whether they wanted to become Digital Service Act or DSA trusted flaggers, there's a bit of hesitancy, no doubt about that. I would say a third said yes, they would apply to become trusted flaggers under the Digital Services Act. And when I asked them why they weren't sure or why they were hesitant in applying, I got a variety of reasons. Mostly they said they needed more information or the requirements under the Digital Services Act, because I think if you look online, there's quite a considerable amount of requirements needed by trusted flaggers to do their job. So those requirements are a little bit daunting, it seems, at the moment, a little bit overwhelming. Funding was an issue. At the moment, it looks like trusted flaggers are not going to get paid for doing the job, but let's watch this space. That could change. Other issues were lack of clarity around what was going to be offered. So different reasons why there was a hesitancy around becoming a trusted flagger. But what I'd love to do is take another temperature check in a year's time, talk to a similar number of civil society organizations and see if that's changed, because that might very well be the case.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's moving pretty fast, right? We're seeing updates after update after update. So I can imagine that, we would be facing a completely different landscape in a year's time.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. And what was an interesting takeaway from talking to the civil society organizations was that the vast majority only monitor the main social media platforms. So when I say the main social media platforms, I'm talking about Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, TikTok. And then there's a huge drop off when it comes to platforms that are not VLOPs, so very large online platforms. So very rarely are EU monitoring CSOs focusing on what we call fringe media. And the reason why is resources. Basically, in a nutshell, it was really easy. Most of them just didn't have the personnel or the capacity to also monitor fringe platforms.
Interesting. And actually, that reminds me of the article we published like a couple months ago already, where we kind of measured the impact of the DSA through the European Observatory of Online Hate. We're doing automated monitoring work. Basically, we have a dashboard that looks at different social media platforms, including the fringe ones. And while we were gearing up for the next iteration of EOH, the previous dashboard was still up and running and analyzed about 90 million social media messages. And during the first iteration of EOH, we saw an increase in toxicity all over the board for about 2 years. So every month, toxicity, online hate, online disinformation would increase up until 2024. In February 2024, all of a sudden, we saw quite a significant drop in online toxicity on mainstream social media platforms. And coincidentally, that was the time where the DSA started to be enforced for these VLOPs, like the very large online platforms. Now, even more interesting, we didn't see or we didn't notice that drop in toxicity on fringe platforms such as 4chan and Gap. So they remained as toxic as before. So what this is telling me, of course, it's not conclusive. It's just something we spotted in the data. It's not a clear proof that the DSA is working. I would say this is an optimistic sign. This is a very positive sign. But it's also telling me that a lot of eyes are currently on the mainstream platforms. And with these eyes on those platforms, apparently the platforms are listening, or they're tweaking some things, or at least taking down some of the hate. But that's not the case on these fringe platforms. So I think, also based on your needs assessment and your conversations with civil society, I think we need more eyes on those fringe platforms.
I completely agree, and that's why when we were really clear that we wanted fringe platforms included in the EOH dashboard, because I completely understand why civil society organizations don't have the capacity to be manually monitoring 10 platforms every day. It's just, I mean, you'd need a team of monitors being paid around the clock to do it. So that's why it's important to have AI, automatic detection, to help them see the big picture, like you said, the sudden reduction around February 2024, and then allow them to do the very, very valuable manual monitoring work, but by having automatic detection tools to enhance the monitoring work that they're doing. So, I mean, that was another big takeaway from the needs assessment that I did, which is that very few civil society organizations are using tech. And when they are using tech, it's not bespoke tech, it's tech that is being used for other purposes, like social listening tools, which are not really fit for purpose in this case. And it is anything down to using Excel. So I think we can say that civil society organizations really need to be given access to tech that works to help them have a broad brush picture of what's happening on social media and to have access to data.
And I think that for me already screams next episode. Like access to data is so important. I think we can dedicate like a full hour to talk about that. Because
Absolutely.
it's not being made easy, right, by the social media platform.
Not yet, but I think there's a delegated act to be passed in 2024, and that should give some clarity on access to data. So that might very well be episode number 1 of 2025. And we've got some fantastic experts to bring in on that topic and help us navigate it, because it's all new. And now's a perfect opportunity, actually, Jordi, to bring in our first guest today. Daniel Heller from CEJI and Facing Facts in Belgium is going to talk to us a little bit about the DSA.
And we interviewed Daniel at INAC's annual conference in Budapest this year. And we asked Daniel what impact he's seeing monitoring hate speech.
So Facing Facts just came up with a policy brief on the DSA, and we actually see that the impact that the DSA is having on monitoring activities, but also to response activities of different civil society organizations and public authorities is quite diverse according to the member states that we are in. And obviously there are member states that are more, in shape, let's say, and more up to date in terms of appointing their digital service coordinators and also starting to appoint trusted flaggers. So when looking at monitoring work, it had a huge impact in the activities of civil society organizations and mostly the monitoring activities. Because we know, for example, that when looking at the DSA, we can now report things as unlawful directly to the platforms. And that brings us to a new completely report form, which actually gives us the possibility to be assisted and to have the content checked by someone, basically a human person, in the platforms themselves. And that helps, but at the same time, we know as well that AI is still a huge factor in terms of moderating and content moderation of the different platforms. So there are still some challenges, and also not all the platforms actually still have the perfect system, but I'm sure that we will get there one day.
So when we're talking about the DSA now, there are new actors in play. You mentioned the digital service coordinators. Can you talk us through the various roles and responsibilities in this new hate speech framework, or I suppose hate speech regulation framework that we've got in the EU?
Yeah. So the DSA actively speaks about a cooperation framework between European Commission, national authorities, and the platforms. But what we see in Facing Facts is that there is still something quite relevant, may I say, actor that is still not considered to be a fully equitable, fully equal partner, which is civil society organizations. That's why in Facing Facts we came up with this response system, that we kind of try to picture in and really showcase all the different actors that have a role in the DSA and more broadly in the monitoring or hate speech activities. And when we look at different actors, we have indeed, as you mentioned, national digital service coordinators. We have trusted flaggers appointed under the DSA. We have academia through vetted researchers and other, regulated entities like VLOPs and VLOSs, so very large online platforms, very large online search engines. By now, it's by asset that I say quite fast. And other regulated entities, so those that do not meet the threshold of 45 million users per month in the EU. And there are still quite some difficulties in the different actors and roles, and not everyone is really, it feels at least that not everyone still really got the whole idea of working in a system. And indeed, when we look at responsibilities, we know that, states have to appoint national digital service coordinators, and there are still 2 countries that didn't do, Belgium and Poland. And this also brings a huge layback on the whole implementation of the DSA, because we know that until digital service coordinators are appointed and their role and also their activities are actually defined by law, this has an impact on the trusted flaggers that cannot be appointed. And then this has a huge impact on what we call the board, so meaning the European Commission and National Digital Service Coordinator activities, which also has a role and an impact on the oversight role of the European Commission towards regulated entities, more specifically, indeed, very large online platforms and very large online search engines. And also, just to add, because why not, on the role that digital service coordinators have at the national level to regulate and to implement regulatory systems for small platforms. So it's a whole cascade of layback and delays that actually has an influence on the implementation of the DSA at the national level.
And I mean, it's early days. So I'm hoping 2024, I'm hoping by 2025, those roles and responsibilities will have settled in. I mean, even with Belgium and Poland, you can hear on the ground, they may not be appointed, but there's work going on. There are probably internal issues to kind of publicly announce it, but there's definitely some groundwork going on. So I feel optimistic that the wheels are in motion. And certainly some countries are charging ahead. Like Ireland has Commission Demand set up. They've hired staff, they're in place, they're in situ, they're working on recruiting trusted flaggers actively. Germany also, there are definitely some positive progress made.
Definitely. I'm happy you mentioned the name of the DSCs in Ireland, because I wouldn't be able to pronounce that. But definitely, I mean, we see that there are many differences in the countries, also due to the fact that in Ireland, for example, there are many VLOPSs that are established there. So it's their role is quite relevant. But we also see that there is a difference in the implementation, also due to the, allow me to say, like the scale of the country, meaning indeed, we see a difference between how CNAM is established compared to, the limited resources in terms of staff, in terms of, also possibilities for training, for example, that happen in other countries like Croatia. There are definitely problems and challenges that need to be overcome, and one way to overcome, and one thing that we are actively trying to propose and try to bring also through the Facing Facts network is really to have all of them at the same level, because let's not forget that they come from a different background, which is not actively looking and working on hate speech field. It's mostly on media and audiovisual services. So there is a need for all the DSCs to actually get at the same level in terms of knowledge, understanding, and also knowledge of civil society organization and the work and the impact we have at the national level, because it's not only monitoring, it's also educational activities that we promote that actively foster an inclusive Europe.
We're on the same page. Civil society platforms, digital service coordinators, in wanting a regulatory framework that is going to keep the online space safer, less toxic, less dangerous, and it feels like there's tweaking needed, maybe quicker than is currently going on, but it feels like a positive trajectory. What would you agree, Daniel? What do you think?
Absolutely. I feel that there is a lot of critics moved against the DSA, but I think that we may be missing something that is very important. We are moving from the code of conduct on countering illegal hate speech online, which was a voluntary code. So it was not something that, platforms or in general, the different actors in the response system in hate speech need to or had to follow to something that is actually law. It's actually an act. The DSA, it's something that they have to work on and they have to implement. And again, I feel that, the steps that have been taken by CNAM, for example, recently with their review of the platforms and trying to see how they are mapping out and their activities and their services against the national law, it's a positive development because that will actually bring CNAM and other DSCs in their national context to have this regulatory work and regulatory role that will actually move forward the DSA and national laws in being implemented also and reflected also in the policies and community standards and service of the platforms.
That was Daniel Heller being interviewed by our own Lydia. And Lydia, I must say, we did this interview a couple months ago already. And what really struck me is that it's still the same. It's still all in development and we're still putting the pieces together. When do you think that the DSA will be clear enough to all of us?
I think even since that call, we've made progress. Like I said, on the transparency reports, we're getting accredited trusted flaggers by the day. The Delegated Act will let us know. We'll know soon about access to data for researchers. So it's absolutely moving in the right direction. And awareness is being raised all the time through podcasts like this. So I feel like we're on the right track, and I feel like outreach through digital service coordinators is going really well. When I speak to civil society organizations who are involved in this field, they're all really pleasantly surprised by the engagement, the openness, and the commitment. And I feel like we've just got a bigger team working on a really, really serious issue. I think there's reasons to be hopeful, and I would imagine that I think by the middle of next year we will have substantial progress made. There'll be trusted flaggers probably in most, if not all, of the EU member states who will be collaborating with social media platforms to help them regulate, to make sure that the illegal content on their platforms is removed and removed quickly.
It's definitely something we will be monitoring also in this podcast. So we'll keep our finger on the pulse. We'll keep listening. We'll keep trying to understand the impact of the Digital Services Act, because maybe some infringement procedures will be popping up soon.
Well, if we don't know the answer ourselves, we have a wonderful variety of experts who are happy to come on Zooming In on Hate, or have been in Zooming In on Hate before, who will come and advise us well on the topic.
Absolutely. So I think this was it for the first revamped episode of Zooming In on Hate. Join us next time, because next time we will be talking about how hate on social media can spill over into the streets. Check out our website, www.eooh.eu, where you can also find the DSA monitoring report and some insights from the needs assessment that we shared earlier in this episode. I would like to thank you, Lydia. It's good to be back.
Great to talk to you, Jordi, and looking forward to the next few episodes.
Me too. Take care, everybody.